The boys nobody wanted just bought the hospital this town was about to shut down. The sentence rolled through Maple Creek like thunder before a storm, whispered between grocery aisles, repeated inside the diner beside steaming mugs of burnt coffee, carried across front porches where old men sat in creaking chairs beneath slow-moving ceiling fans. By noon, nearly half the town had gathered outside St. Mary's Medical Center, the aging brick hospital that had stood at the edge of town for more than 60 years. The white paint around the entrance was peeling in long curls. The ambulance bay lights flickered on and off like tired eyes, and a cold November wind pushed dry leaves across the cracked parking lot in restless circles. People stood shoulder to shoulder beneath gray skies, jackets zipped tight against the chill, all staring at the line of black SUVs parked near the front entrance. Nobody knew exactly who had arrived, only that helicopters had circled low an hour earlier, and reporters from Nashville and Atlanta suddenly cared about a town most maps forgot existed. Sheriff Donnelly adjusted his hat and squinted toward the hospital doors while Mayor Richard Coleman smoothed the front of his expensive charcoal coat, forcing a smile that looked thinner every second. Probably some corporate takeover, someone muttered nearby. Maybe they're tearing the place down. A little girl sitting on her father's shoulders pointed toward the first SUV as the back door slowly opened. A tall black man stepped out wearing a navy overcoat that moved sharply in the wind. Behind him came another man carrying blueprints beneath one arm, glasses catching the pale sunlight. Then a third stepped out last, younger than the others, dressed in dark scrubs beneath a long black coat, with a silver stethoscope still hanging around his neck. The crowd went strangely quiet. Not silent completely. There were still distant car engines, the rattle of a loose hospital flagpole, the dry rustle of leaves skimming across pavement. But the talking stopped. The three men stood beside each other for a moment, looking up at the hospital like they were staring at something sacred. The youngest swallowed hard before asking softly, "Is Miss Evelyn here yet?" Mayor Coleman frowned immediately. "Excuse me." The man in scrubs turned toward him politely. "Evelyn Brooks. We were told she still lives in Maple Creek." The mayor blinked twice, clearly confused. Around him, older residents exchanged uncertain looks. Some recognized the names before they recognized the faces. Then an elderly woman near the back suddenly lifted her trembling hand to her mouth. "Marcus," she whispered. The tallest man looked over. His expression softened instantly. "Miss Clara." Her grocery bag slipped from her fingers, apples rolling across the sidewalk unnoticed. "Lord have mercy," she breathed. "It's the Brooks boys." The words spread through the crowd like wildfire. People stared harder now, searching past the expensive coats and polished shoes, past the security teams and television cameras. And slowly, beneath the success and confidence, they began to see the shadows of three boys they once crossed the street to avoid. Marcus Hill, Ethan Cole, Jamal Reed. 15 years ago, nobody in Maple Creek wanted them near their homes. Teachers called them troubled. Foster parents called them impossible. The town newspaper once described them as a danger waiting to happen. But one woman had opened her front door anyway. One black woman with tired eyes, worn church shoes, and barely enough money to keep her lights on. And now the boys nobody wanted had come back richer, stronger, and more powerful than anyone in town could have imagined. But none of that shocked Maple Creek nearly as much as what they said next. Marcus stepped toward the microphone slowly, the wind pulling at his coat while reporters raised cameras in every direction. His voice came calm and steady. "We're not here to buy this hospital for business." He paused, glancing briefly toward the old neighborhood across town, where a small yellow porch light had burned every night for 15 years. "We came back to repay a debt." 15 years earlier, the sky above Maple Creek carried the pale gold color of early autumn, and the air smelled like pine trees, rain-soaked dirt, and gasoline from the old county buses rumbling. Down Main Street, Evelyn Brooks stood outside the county social services building holding a paper bag filled with canned soup, discount bread, and a half-gallon of milk balanced carefully against her hip. Her blue cafeteria uniform still carried the faint scent of cornbread and cafeteria coffee from the elementary school, where she worked double shifts. She was tired in the kind of way that settled deep into the bones, but her face still carried warmth, the soft, steady warmth people trusted without understanding why. As she reached the parking lot, a sharp metallic sound cut through the afternoon. One of the county transport vans had pulled into the curb too fast, its brakes squealing against wet pavement. The back doors opened. 3 boys stepped out under the supervision of a social worker already looking impatient. The oldest, Marcus Hill, could not have been older than 14. Tall for his age, broad shoulders, jaw locked tight like he had already learned life only respected hardness. His dark hoodie hung loose over worn jeans, and his sharp brown eyes scanned everything around him with quiet distrust. Beside him stood Ethan Cole, thinner, pale freckles dusting across his nose beneath messy brown curls. He held a ripped paperback book against his chest so tightly the corners bent inward. He did not speak, did not look up, just followed instructions with the empty stillness of someone used to disappearing. Then there was Jamal Reed, barely 7 years old, his tiny sneakers untied, clutching a clear plastic bag with 2 toy cars rattling softly inside. His eyes looked swollen from crying, though he tried hard not to let anyone notice. The social worker exhaled heavily as she checked paperwork against a clipboard. The Henderson family backed out this morning, she muttered to another employee nearby. Again, the second woman shook her head. Nobody wants to take all 3 together. Marcus heard it. The muscle near his jaw tightened, but he kept walking without a word. Jamal stumbled briefly on the curb, and Ethan quietly steadied him before anyone else noticed. Evelyn stopped moving. Something inside her chest shifted painfully at the sight. Not pity. Exactly. Recognition. She had seen that same guarded look years earlier in her own son after doctors started using words no mother ever wanted to hear. The same silence. The same fear of being unwanted. A gust of wind swept through the parking lot, lifting dry leaves around the boys' feet while traffic lights blinked lazily across the street. Nobody else paid attention to them. Parents walked past holding coffee cups. County workers smoked cigarettes near the entrance. A man loading boxes into a pickup truck glanced once before looking away. Invisible. That was what the boys had become. Evelyn watched Jamal tighten both hands around the plastic bag, like it contained everything he had left in the world. Her throat tightened. "Excuse me," she called softly before she could second-guess herself. The social worker turned immediately, already looking exhausted. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Evelyn stepped closer slowly. Up close, the boys looked even smaller somehow despite Marcus trying so hard to appear tough. There were faint shadows beneath their eyes. Wrinkled clothes. Hunger hidden behind pride. "Where are they going?" she asked quietly. The worker sighed. "Temporary motel placement tonight unless another foster family calls back." Marcus let out a low, bitter laugh under his breath. Ethan stared harder at the pavement. Jamal's fingers curled tighter around the toy cars. Evelyn looked at the 3 boys standing beneath the cold county building lights while wind pushed against their thin jackets. Then she asked the question that would change every life standing in that parking lot forever. "Can they stay together?" The social worker blinked in disbelief, the clipboard lowering slightly in her hands as cold wind swept through the parking lot again. "You mean tonight?" she asked carefully. Evelyn nodded once. No child should sleep in a motel wondering who is giving them back tomorrow. Marcus scoffed immediately and turned away, pacing 2 slow steps toward the transport van like he regretted hearing any of this. "Do not waste your time," he muttered. "We are not staying anywhere long." His voice carried the rough edge of someone far older than 14. Evelyn studied him quietly. Beneath the guarded stare and tense shoulders, she saw exhaustion. Not anger. Exhaustion. Ethan still held the torn paperback against his chest while Jamal looked between the adults nervously, unsure whether hope was safe. The social worker shifted awkwardly. "Miss Brooks, you are not currently licensed for foster placement." "Then tell me what papers I need." "It does not work that fast. Children grow scared fast," Evelyn replied softly. The woman hesitated, clearly torn between procedure and conscience. Across the lot, thunder rolled faintly beyond the mountains, and the late afternoon sky deepened into shades of blue-gray velvet. Finally, the social worker exhaled. "Temporary emergency placement. 72 hours maximum until the county reviews it." Marcus laughed again, sharper this time. "Told you," he said toward the younger boys. 3 days. Evelyn ignored the bitterness completely. 3 days is enough time to make somebody feel safe. For the first time, Ethan looked up at her directly. His green eyes carried surprise more than trust, but it was something. 20 minutes later, Evelyn's old Ford wagon rattled slowly down Willow Creek Road, with all four windows fogging from the sudden rain outside. The heater clicked unevenly beneath the dashboard, while an old gospel station hummed softly through static-filled speakers. Jamal sat in the back seat, clutching a warm paper bag Evelyn had filled with cafeteria dinner rolls before leaving work. Marcus stared out the passenger window, watching blurred headlights streak through rainwater, while Ethan quietly counted telephone poles beneath his breath. Nobody spoke much. The silence was not empty, though. It felt cautious, listening, like four strangers standing at the edge of a frozen lake, deciding whether it could hold their weight. Then the car turned onto a narrow road lined with tall maple trees glowing orange beneath streetlights. At the very end sat a small white house with blue shutters and a wraparound porch lit by a single warm yellow bulb. Rain tapped softly against the roof while flower pots swayed gently beside the steps. It was not large, not polished, but it glowed against the dark, rode like something alive. Jamal stared at it wide-eyed. "That is your house?" he whispered. Evelyn smiled softly. "Sure is." Marcus frowned immediately. "Lady, we are not sleeping on floors. Good thing I have beds. You do not even know us." Evelyn parked slowly beneath the old oak tree in the yard. "That has not stopped life from knowing you have been hurt." Marcus looked away again, jaw tightening hard. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon tea, clean laundry, and baked chicken cooling beneath foil on the kitchen counter. A grandfather clock ticked steadily near the fireplace while rainwater shimmered against the windows in silver streaks. Family photographs lined the hallway. Smiling faces. Church picnics. School graduations. One frame sat turned slightly inward near the mantel, dusted carefully every day. Jamal wandered toward the kitchen slowly, drawn by the smell of food. Ethan noticed shelves filled with books beside the living room sofa. Marcus remained near the front door, shoulders tense, backpack still hanging from one arm like he might leave any second. Evelyn placed 4 bowls on the table and switched on the small hanging light above them. Warm amber light spilled across the room instantly, softening every shadow. "House rule," she said gently. "Nobody eats alone here." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, suspicious and uncertain. Then slowly, almost against his own will, he stepped farther inside and closed the front door behind him. The first morning arrived wrapped in silver fog drifting low across Maple Creek, the kind that softened rooftops and made the whole town look gentler than it really was. Evelyn woke before sunrise the way she always did, moving quietly through the kitchen in fuzzy slippers while coffee brewed beside the stove with rich, earthy warmth filling the house. Outside, dew shimmered across the front lawn beneath the yellow porch light she had forgotten to switch off. She did not mind. That light stayed on most nights anyway. It made the house feel less lonely. Upstairs remained silent except for the occasional creak of old floorboards settling beneath the cool morning air. Evelyn flipped pancakes slowly on the skillet while bacon crackled beside them, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine the sound upstairs was ordinary family noise instead of 3 frightened boys trying not to trust her. Then she noticed the back door slightly open. Her stomach dropped. She stepped outside quickly into the cold air and found Marcus sitting alone on the porch steps, wearing the same hoodie from yesterday, elbows resting on his knees while steam rose faintly from his breath. The sunrise painted the edges of the mountains soft gold behind him, beautiful enough to belong on a postcard, but Marcus barely looked at it. His eyes stayed fixed on the empty road ahead. "You planning to run?" Evelyn asked gently from the doorway. Marcus shrugged without looking back. "Thought about it." "And?" "Your porch light stayed on." Evelyn leaned against the wooden railing quietly. "That changed your mind." Marcus rubbed his hands together against the cold. "Places do not leave lights on for us." The words landed heavier than he intended. He looked embarrassed immediately after saying them, but Evelyn pretended not to notice. Instead, she stepped beside him and handed over a warm mug of cocoa. "House gets cold in the mornings," she said softly. Marcus stared at the mug before taking it carefully. His fingers were rough, knuckles scraped from old fights he never talked about. Yet beneath the hard expression, his face still carried traces of boyhood he had not completely lost. Inside the house, Ethan had already discovered the bookshelf near the fireplace. Evelyn found him sitting cross-legged on the rug, still wearing pajama pants too short at the ankles, completely absorbed in an old astronomy encyclopedia with sunlight falling across his curls in golden streaks. Jamal sat nearby coloring silently with a box of crayons Evelyn found in the hallway closet overnight. Every few minutes he glanced toward the kitchen just to make sure she was still there. The smell of pancakes finally pulled all three boys to the table. The kitchen glowed warm beneath hanging copper lights, while soft gospel music played low from the radio near the sink. Rain from the night before still clung to the windows in tiny, sparkling droplets. Jamal ate carefully at first like he expected someone to take the plate away. Ethan barely looked up from his book while chewing. Marcus acted unimpressed, but reached for thirds when he thought nobody noticed. Evelyn smiled into her coffee cup without saying a word. Then came the knock at the door. Sharp. Formal. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Marcus stiffened first. Ethan lowered the book slowly. Jamal froze with syrup still on his fork. Evelyn opened the front door to find Mayor Richard Coleman standing there beside a woman from County Services. His expensive wool coat looked out of place against the chipped porch paint and flower baskets hanging beside the windows. Coleman smiled politely, but his pale eyes carried judgment colder than the morning air. He glanced past Evelyn toward the boys at the kitchen table. "Miss Brooks," he said smoothly, "I heard you took in the Hill boy." Marcus looked down immediately at his plate. Coleman continued, "That child has caused problems in every foster placement across 2 counties." Evelyn folded her arms quietly. "He has been here less than 12 hours. Coleman gave a dry laugh. "Trouble does not need long." For a brief second, nobody moved. The grandfather clock ticked softly inside the hallway. Bacon grease crackled low on the stove. Then Jamal slid off his chair and walked carefully toward Evelyn until his tiny hand wrapped around 2 of her fingers. Coleman noticed. So did Marcus. And for the first time since arriving at the house, something dangerous cracked inside Marcus Hill's guarded expression. Not anger. Something far more frightening to a boy like him. The feeling of wanting to belong. The county approved the temporary placement 2 days later, but Maple Creek reacted the way small towns often did when kindness disrupted the order they were comfortable with. People smiled politely to Evelyn's face inside church hallways and grocery stores, then lowered their voices the moment she walked away. By the second week, whispers followed the boys everywhere. Teachers watched Marcus too closely at school. Parents pulled their children nearer when the brothers passed through town. Even the cashier at Miller's Market counted change twice whenever Marcus stood near the register. The message was always the same. You are tolerated here, not trusted. Evelyn noticed every single glance. She simply refused to let the boys see how much it hurt her. Autumn deepened across Maple Creek with breathtaking color. Golden leaves drifted through the streets like slow-moving fire, while chilly evening air carried the scent of chimney smoke and wet earth. Every afternoon, Evelyn returned from the elementary school cafeteria with aching feet and grocery bags balanced carefully against her hip. The house had changed already. Jamal's toy car sat lined along the windowsill. Ethan spent hours fixing an old radio he found in the garage, tiny screws scattered across the coffee table beside open science books. Marcus still kept emotional distance between himself and everyone else, but some evenings Evelyn caught him quietly repairing loose porch boards or carrying wood for the fireplace before she could ask. None of them used the word family. Not yet. Then came the phone call from Maple Creek Middle School. Evelyn arrived just before sunset with her coat half-buttoned and cafeteria apron still beneath it. Principal Harris met her near the office entrance looking exhausted. Marcus sat alone outside the principal's office with a split lip and bruised pride hidden beneath cold silence. A teenage boy from another grade sat farther down the hallway, avoiding eye contact. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly, while distant basketball practice echoed from the gymnasium. Marcus got into an altercation. Principal Harris explained carefully. Another student made comments about foster kids, and things escalated. Marcus stared at the floor. "I told him to stop," he muttered quietly. He kept talking. Evelyn looked at Marcus for a long moment. He expected disappointment. Maybe yelling. Maybe the same tired speech every adult eventually gave him. Instead, she crouched slightly until her eyes met his. "Did you hurt somebody badly?" Marcus shook his head once. "No, ma'am." "Did you try walking away first?" A pause. Then another nod. Evelyn exhaled softly. "All right. Principal." Harris blinked in surprise. "Miss Brooks, This behavior cannot continue. Evelyn stood slowly. Neither can children learning cruelty before algebra. The principal said nothing after that. Outside, dusk painted the sky deep shades of purple and orange while cold wind rattled branches overhead. Marcus followed Evelyn toward the car in silence until he finally stopped near the passenger door. "Why are you still doing this?" he asked suddenly. Evelyn turned. "Doing what?" "Keeping us." The words came rough, almost angry. "Everybody else quits." Evelyn looked at him carefully beneath the fading light. Marcus was handsome in the striking, unfinished way some boys became before life hardened them fully. Strong jaw, sharp eyes, hurt buried so deeply it leaked through every sentence whether he wanted it to or not. Evelyn reached up gently and straightened the crooked collar of his hoodie. "Because somebody should have stayed with you the first time," she said softly. Marcus looked away immediately, throat tightening hard. That night rain rolled over Maple Creek again, tapping steadily against the windows while thunder murmured far beyond the hills. Evelyn sat alone in the laundry room, folding towels beneath dim yellow light after the boys had gone upstairs. The exhaustion finally caught her there. Bills stacked on the dryer beside her. Foster paperwork unfinished. Another notice from the bank tucked beneath the detergent box. Her shoulders trembled once before she pressed both hands against her face, breathing carefully so nobody upstairs would hear her cry. Then came soft footsteps near the doorway. Jamal stood there holding a blanket almost too large for his tiny arms. Without saying anything, he walked across the room and draped it gently over Evelyn's shoulders. Behind him, Ethan silently set the repaired radio on top of the dryer. Warm jazz music crackled softly through the speaker. And outside, beneath the storm and darkness, the porch light stayed glowing against the rain. Winter arrived gently in Maple Creek, covering rooftops with silver frost and wrapping the town in quiet white mornings that made even broken places look softer. The Brooks house glowed warmly against the cold like a lantern at the end of the street. Smoke curled from the chimney at sunrise, and every evening the yellow porch light spilled across fresh snow in a long golden path. Inside, life settled into rhythms none of them trusted enough to name aloud. Evelyn woke before dawn each morning to iron school uniforms and pack lunches, while soft jazz played from the kitchen radio Ethan had fully restored. Jamal now laughed freely sometimes, bright sudden laughter that filled rooms before he remembered to feel embarrassed by happiness. Ethan spent afternoons sketching buildings and notebooks beside the fireplace, his sharp green eyes quietly studying every bridge, rooftop, and church steeple in town like he could already imagine better versions of them. Marcus still carried storms inside him, but slowly the storms became quieter. Some nights Evelyn would wake near midnight and find him sitting on the porch steps beneath a wool blanket, staring at the stars with a look too thoughtful for someone his age. He never talked much about the past. He just stayed close to the house now, as if part of him feared it might disappear if he wandered too far away. Then one Friday evening the snow came harder than expected. Thick white flakes drifted through Maple Creek beneath pale blue twilight, while storefront Christmas lights reflected beautifully across icy sidewalks downtown. Evelyn's old station wagon struggled through the roads after her shift ended early at the school cafeteria. By the time she reached home, snow had gathered thick against the porch railings and pine branches bowed beneath the weight of winter. The house smelled like tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches by the time the boys came downstairs. Jamal wore socks that did not match. Ethan carried 3 books stacked against his chest. Marcus arrived last, hair damp from snowflakes melting across his forehead after chopping firewood outside. They gathered around the small kitchen table while wind pushed softly against the windows and the radio hummed low beside the sink. For a while nobody spoke much. The kind of silence that used to feel painful now felt warm instead. Safe. Evelyn watched them carefully while pouring soup into bowls. Jamal immediately reached for extra crackers and slid half toward Ethan without being asked. Ethan quietly fixed the crooked napkin under Marcus's bowl before returning to his book. Marcus noticed but pretended not to. Tiny things. Ordinary things. The kind families built without realizing it. Then the power suddenly went out. The house dropped into darkness except for pale moonlight spilling through snow-covered windows. Jamal gasped softly. Outside, the entire street disappeared beneath the storm. Evelyn moved calmly through the dark until the sound of a match striking broke the silence. One by one, candles flickered alive around the kitchen, warm amber light dancing gently across tired wallpaper and old wooden cabinets. Snow continued falling outside in thick, peaceful waves while shadows moved softly against the walls. The boy sat quietly watching the candles. Ethan smiled first. Very small, almost hidden. Feels like a movie, he murmured. Evelyn laughed softly under her breath. A low-budget one, maybe. Marcus shook his head slowly while staring around the glowing kitchen. No, he said quietly. Feels real. The words hung in the room longer than anybody expected. Jamal curled closer against Evelyn's side beneath the blanket wrapped around both of them. Upstairs, wind rattled lightly against the roof while candlelight reflected inside the windows like tiny stars. Then came a sound so soft Evelyn almost missed it. Good night, Mama Evelyn. Jamal said it half asleep, eyes already closing against her shoulder. Nobody moved afterward. Not Marcus. Not Ethan. Even the storm outside seemed to pause for one impossible second. Evelyn lowered her eyes quickly, pressing trembling fingers against the little boy's curls while tears gathered silently in the corners of her warm brown eyes. Across the table, Marcus looked away toward the candles immediately, jaw tightening hard. Ethan removed his glasses and wiped them slowly, though they were not dirty at all. And in that small, glowing kitchen surrounded by snow and silence, for lonely people stopped feeling temporary. 15 years later, Maple Creek barely recognized the men. Stepping through its streets beneath flashing camera lights and drifting autumn leaves. Marcus Hill walked with calm authority now, his dark tailored coat moving sharply in the wind while reporters struggled to keep pace beside him. The anger that once lived openly across his face had settled into quiet confidence, making him look less dangerous and somehow far more powerful. Ethan Cole adjusted his glasses while studying the crumbling hospital architecture with focused green eyes that still noticed every cracked beam and rusted railing the way he once studied bridges in library books beside Evelyn's fireplace. Beside them, Dr. Jamal Reed greeted frightened patients outside the emergency entrance with such gentle warmth that nurses immediately trusted him before learning his name. Maple Creek stood frozen, watching all three men move through town like they belonged there now. But the truth was more complicated. They had returned because the one person who truly gave them a home no longer answered her phone. Inside St. Mary's Medical Center, fluorescent lights buzzed weakly above pale hallways that smelled faintly of antiseptic and old paint. Evelyn Brooks rested quietly near the window of a small hospital room overlooking the mountains. Time had softened her features, but never dimmed them. Her silver curls framed warm brown eyes, still capable of making frightened people feel safe within seconds. A thin blanket covered her lap, while late afternoon sunlight painted golden lines across her face. On the bedside table sat a framed photograph of three teenage boys standing awkwardly on a front porch beside a smiling black woman in a blue Sunday dress. The frame had been touched, so often the corners were smooth. Outside her room, doctors argued quietly with hospital administrators about budget shortages and closure notices. Maple Creek's hospital would shut down within months unless someone stepped in with impossible money. Most people believed the town had already lost hope. Then Marcus Hill purchased the entire medical debt before noon. News spread faster than wildfire. By evening, every diner, television, church parking lot, and grocery store checkout line buzzed with disbelief. Mayor Richard Coleman stood near the nurse's station staring through the glass wall into Evelyn's room, while television reporters crowded behind him. He looked older now, smaller somehow. The polished confidence he once carried had worn thin over the years. "Those are her boys," one reporter whispered. An elderly nurse nearby smiled softly. "No," she replied. "Those are the men she raised." Down the hallway, Jamal stepped quietly into Evelyn's room first. His face softened immediately seeing her asleep beneath the pale sunlight. Even as a world-renowned pediatric surgeon, standing inside operating rooms worth millions of dollars, nothing still affected him like seeing Mama Evelyn tired. He adjusted the blanket gently around her shoulders the same way she once wrapped blankets around him during thunderstorms. Ethan followed, carrying blueprints beneath one arm. Marcus remained at the doorway for several extra seconds, emotions flickering behind composed eyes. 15 years disappeared inside him all at once. The soup dinners, the porch light, snow falling against candlelit windows, a woman choosing them when nobody else would. Evelyn stirred softly, then opened her eyes. For a brief moment, she looked confused by the sunlight, the hospital room, the expensive coats. Then she saw them, truly saw them. Her breath caught instantly. Jamal smiled first, tears already shining in his eyes. Ethan lowered his head, trying unsuccessfully to hide emotion. Marcus stepped closer slowly, hands trembling despite every courtroom victory and television interview that had taught him how to stay composed. "Hey, Mama Evelyn," he said quietly. Her hand rose toward her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "Lord," she whispered shakily, "look at my boys." Outside the hospital room, Maple Creek watched through glass windows and half-open doors while silence spread down the hallway. Not because 3 successful men had returned wealthy and important, but because every person standing there suddenly understood the same thing at once. The woman this town once pitied had quietly built something extraordinary inside a small white house with a porch light that never went dark. 3 days later, the entire town gathered beneath a clear autumn sky outside St. Mary's Medical Center, where fresh white banners now hung across the entrance and strings of warm lights shimmered softly against the brick walls as evening approached. Maple Creek had not looked this alive in years. Children ran through piles of amber leaves near the sidewalk, while church choirs rehearsed quietly near the front lawn. Local reporters adjusted cameras beside polished black stages decorated with white roses and blue ribbons. Even the old fountain near the entrance, broken for nearly a decade, flowed again beneath golden sunlight. Nobody wanted to miss what the town was already calling a miracle. Evelyn Brooks arrived slowly in a wheelchair pushed gently by Jamal through the crowd. The moment people saw her, conversations softened into silence. She wore a simple cream-colored coat and pearl earrings she only saved for church Sundays and funerals. Her silver curls caught the light beautifully, while emotion shimmered openly across her warm, tired face. Marcus walked beside her in a charcoal suit tailored perfectly against his tall frame, one steady hand resting protectively near the back of her chair whenever sidewalks became uneven. Ethan moved ahead, organizing final construction plans with hospital staff, his calm voice carrying quiet authority that surprised people who once remembered him as the silent foster boy nobody could reach. Maple Creek watched them together and struggled to reconcile memory with reality. Mayor Richard Coleman stood near the stage waiting nervously. Age had bent him slightly at the shoulders, and for the first time in decades he no longer looked like the most powerful man in town. When Evelyn approached, he removed his hat slowly. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly. She smiled politely. "Richard." For several seconds, he seemed unable to continue. Around them cameras clicked softly while cold wind moved through the maple trees overhead. Finally, he lowered his eyes. "I was wrong about those boys." Marcus looked away toward the crowd immediately, jaw tightening beneath controlled silence. Coleman swallowed hard. "Truth is," he admitted shakily, "I was wrong. About you too." Evelyn studied him gently without bitterness. That somehow made the apology harder for him to survive. "This town judged what it did not understand," he continued. "And you love those boys anyway." Tears gathered briefly in his pale eyes before he cleared his throat and stepped aside from the microphone. "I think Maple Creek owes you more than words." The ceremony began just as the sunset painted the mountains deep shades of gold and crimson behind the hospital. Warm lights spilled across the crowd while musicians played softly near the entrance steps. Jamal stepped toward the podium first, his white doctor's coat bright beneath the evening sky. "When I was 7 years old," he began quietly, "I carried everything I owned inside a plastic grocery bag." The crowd fell completely silent. Ethan followed next, holding folded blueprints in careful hands. "People thought we needed saving from who we were," he said. "But she taught us we only needed someone willing to stay." Then Marcus stepped forward last. The wind tugged gently against his dark coat, while television cameras focused tightly on his face. "Everybody sees success now," he said steadily. "Degrees, money, titles. But none of that started in boardrooms or universities." He paused, glancing toward Evelyn beneath the glowing lights. "It started in a small white house where one black woman kept the porch light on even when the world gave up on us." Across the crowd, People wiped tears openly now. Nurses, teachers, mechanics, elderly church ladies who once whispered doubts behind grocery store shelves. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and removed a polished silver key attached to a blue ribbon. He walked slowly toward Evelyn before kneeling beside her wheelchair. "Mama Evelyn," he said softly, voice finally breaking at the edges. "This hospital belongs to the town now. Fully funded forever." The crowd gasped quietly. Jamal smiled through tears while Ethan unfolded the final architectural rendering behind them. At the very top of the new building entrance, written in elegant silver letters against blue glass, stood the name every person there would remember for the rest of their lives. Evelyn Brooks Children's Center. Evelyn covered her mouth instantly as tears slipped down her cheeks beneath the golden evening light. For a long moment, she could not speak at all. Then she reached forward with trembling hands and touched Marcus's face gently the same way she had years ago when he was still a frightened, angry boy pretending not to need anybody. "Look what love built," she whispered. The first snow of December fell quietly over Maple Creek the night the new hospital sign finally lit up. Soft white flakes drifted beneath the glowing blue letters of Evelyn Brooks Children's Center while the town settled into the peaceful hush that only winter could bring. The crowds were gone now. Television trucks had disappeared. Reporters chased newer stories in bigger cities. But inside the small white house at the end of Willow Creek Road, warm golden lights still glowed through the windows exactly the same way it had 15 years earlier. The porch light remained on too. It always would. Evelyn sat wrapped in a knitted blanket near the living room window while jazz music played softly from Ethan's old repaired radio beside the fireplace. Outside, snow gathered gently along the porch rails and flower pots while wind brushed through the tall maple trees with a low whispering sound. The house smelled like cinnamon tea and cornbread fresh from the oven. Some things had changed. Some things never needed to. In the kitchen, Jamal carefully stirred soup on the stove while still wearing dark blue scrubs from the hospital. Ethan sat at the table sketching renovation ideas for the pediatric wing across rolled architectural papers. Marcus stood near the sink in a charcoal sweater with his sleeves pushed back, washing dishes badly on purpose just to hear Evelyn complain about it. "You still miss spots," she called from the living room without looking up. Marcus smiled under his breath. "I am a corporate attorney, Mama Evelyn, not a dishwasher. And yet the plates still need cleaning." Jamal laughed softly while Ethan shook his head, smiling into his sketches. The sound filled the house beautifully. Real laughter. The kind that echoed off walls once used to silence. After dinner, the snow deepened outside, turning the entire neighborhood silver beneath the streetlights. Evelyn wandered slowly onto the porch wearing her long cream cardigan while the cold air touched her cheeks gently. The town looked peaceful from there. Church steeples glowing in the distance. Smoke curling from chimneys. Fresh snow smoothing over old roads and cracked sidewalks alike. Behind her, the front door opened quietly. Marcus stepped outside first, followed by Ethan and Jamal carrying blankets and warm mugs of cocoa. Without speaking much, the three men settled beside her on the porch steps exactly where frightened boys once sat years ago wondering whether they would be sent away again. For a while nobody interrupted the silence. Snowflakes landed softly against Marcus's dark curls. Ethan leaned back against the porch railing studying the stars beyond the clouds. Jamal rested his elbows on his knees holding the warm mug between both hands. Then Evelyn looked toward the glowing porch light above them and smiled faintly. "You know," she said softly, "electric bill used to drive me crazy keeping that thing on all night." Marcus glanced upward. "Why did you keep doing it?" Evelyn watched the snow fall across the empty road ahead. "Because I wanted you boys to know there was always a way home." Silence followed again, deep and full and peaceful. Jamal lowered his eyes quickly, emotion catching in his throat. Ethan removed his glasses for a second, rubbing at his eyes against the cold air. Marcus stared out toward the quiet town that once rejected them and realized something simple and enormous at the same time. None of them had returned to prove anybody wrong. They came back because one woman taught them what it felt like to belong somewhere. Inside the house, the grandfather clock ticked softly through the warm rooms while candlelight flickered against old family photographs lining the hallway. One picture showed three awkward boys standing beside a smiling black woman on a snowy porch many winters ago. Another showed three successful men surrounding that same woman beneath hospital lights and television cameras. Different years. Same love. The wind moved gently through the trees again, while snow continued falling beneath the porch light that never went dark. And there on the old wooden steps of a small white house in Maple Creek, four people sat close together listening to the beautiful silence of a life that had finally come full circle.